All right. And then I'll go ahead and stop sharing fish and you can start. If you actually, you know what, why don't I do my little intro and then you can start after that.
Works for me.
So thank you to everyone who was able to join tonight. And I just wanted to give a quick intro about me, about Kindness Grows Here, and about fish. So my name is Kristen Caminiti. I am the founder of Kindness Grows Here. I'm a mom to 4 kids. A quick disclaimer that Kindness Grows Here has no headquarters. So wherever our board of directors is where the events take place. And my headquarters includes 4 children, 2 cats, and a dog, and a bird. So you may hear any of them, see any of them, and that's just the nature of running a grassroots 100% volunteer nonprofit. I also wanted to just tell a little bit about Kindness Grows Here. I sometimes joke that it was an accidental nonprofit because I truly did not set out to start a nonprofit. Back in 2016, I kind of was just looking around at the world and saying, you know, what does the world need more of right now? And I decided that it needed more kindness. And so I was just on a mission to spread kindness as far and wide as I could with my kids and my husband. And we were really on a mission to do that. And I started posting about it on social media. People started asking to join us. I created a little Facebook group. And then something really horrible happened in our community where a noose was hung at our middle school. And we were devastated by such a hateful act. And we wanted to respond in a way that showed that that kind of hate wasn't going to be tolerated in our community. So I'd never before organized an event. I'd never written a press release. I figured out how to do all of that. Said in the press release, there'd be 100 people. And my husband looked at me and said, there's 50 people in your Facebook group. I don't think that's a great estimate. And I said, well, if everybody brings a friend. And so I get there an hour before it's supposed to be held. We were holding a Chalk the Walk event at the middle school where we wanted to fill the sidewalk, positive messages, celebrating love and diversity and kindness. And I arrived and there were 6 news vans there. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then amazingly, about 300 people showed up. We filled the sidewalk with these beautiful messages. It was on the cover of the local paper. It was all over TV. It was on the radio. And shortly after that, people started reaching out to me and saying, how do we support what you're doing? We want to donate so you can keep doing it. And at the time, I thought, oh, that's cute. You know, the first time it happened, that's really sweet. And I just responded and said, oh, thank you so much. I'm just a mom. I'm not an organization. You can't really donate. But then it kept happening. And so people kept reaching out, asking how they could support us. And I kind of looked at my husband and I was like, I think we have to start a nonprofit. And so we did. And now we became an official nonprofit in October of 2017. And so now about 6.5 years later, we have had an impact in 32 states and 7 countries and have given kindness grants out to over 200 kids, which have resulted in over 86,000 people being the direct recipient of a kind act from one of our grants. And so we are so grateful to every parent, every teacher, every coach, every adult who has ever supported a child in carrying out their kindness project, because that really is how our mission gets carried out. So thank you to each of you. Thank you to anyone who's going to watch this video online. And then I just want to take a quick minute to introduce Fish. Last summer, I was reading our local newspaper and I read this amazing op-ed that was in support of LGBTQ plus students in our community. And his bio line mentioned how he had been a board member of the, what was it, anti-bullying, so something.
The International Bullying Prevention Association. Yeah.
There we go. And I was like, this is an amazing op-ed. I've got to meet this guy. And so I reached out and I asked Fish if we could, you know, meet for coffee, told him a little bit about Kindness Grows Here. Long story short, by the end of that first meeting, I think I had invited him to consider to join our board. There's somebody else. And Fish joined our board shortly thereafter. And there are some people in life who we meet and we sort of feel like we've known them forever. And Fish is one of those people for me. He is just remarkable in every way. He jumps in and gets involved, and he truly, truly cares about kids. And so he is a huge asset to our board of directors. And he's truly an expert. He is a child development expert. He has been an educator. He is highly educated at Harvard and Yale, and we are so lucky to have him here tonight to share his expertise. So with that, Fish, I will gladly hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kristen. And thanks to the folks who are here. Sorry, I'm going to show a slideshow real quick. Oh no, what am I doing? That wasn't how it was supposed to work. Okay. So welcome to Maximizing the Magic of Kid Kindness Grants. We're really going to talk tonight, and my hope is that we are going to talk. I've got about maybe 20 to 30 minutes of slides, but then I want to be able to take any questions folks have, and they're going to be questions I'm asking you along the way. But talking about how to use the experience of carrying out a service project like a Kid Kindness Grant as a really catalytic experience for the young people you work with, whether they're your kids or they're students that you teach, to transform the way they see themselves and the way they see their ability to change their community. So Kristen called me a child development expert. I don't know if I would take that label. What I am is someone who spent a little bit of time learning from people way smarter than me about how kids grow strong and kind, and a lot of time trying to build programs that help kids do that. So what I'm going to talk about is sort of what service projects are at their best, what the outcomes could be if everything goes right for kids. I'm going to go through that really quick because I think we all know, intuitively that this can be a really incredible process for kids. I'm going to spend most of the time talking about what you can do, specific tactical strategies that you can use, questions you can ask, things that you can say, ways to step up and step back when you're working with your young people to make this a really formative experience. Just a little bit about me briefly. So my day job is I work as the head of program and curriculum at Legends, which is a tech startup that helps build kids' confidence. We create apps that parents and kids use together to help build kids' positive mental health, build their self-concept, how they see themselves, their self-compassion, how they treat themselves, and their self-efficacy, how they believe in themselves. So we work with thousands of kids and their parents around the country. I did my academic training at Yale at the Child Study Center, and then at Harvard at their Graduate School of Education, studying child development and psychology. And a lot of my work has been around how we help kids really not just feel valued and feel important to the people around them, but feel like they can make a difference by actually doing it. So I spent a big chunk of my career working at an organization called Peace First that trained and funded thousands of young people around the world to lead service projects just like Kid Kindness Grants through a developmental perspective. So saying, as we're helping them do this project, how are we thinking about how this is helping them grow as leaders, not just what they're producing? And as part of that, we worked with the Born This Way Foundation and the International Federation of the Red Cross to help design their youth leadership programs. So, I've been lucky to work with some incredible folks from all around the world to help think about what does it really mean when young people are challenged to do something good in the world, supported to do it really well, and then given the resources to make that a tradition of leadership that lasts a lifetime. So really quickly, I want to talk about the environment that we're in right now and why service projects are so important as a catalyst. We're at a moment in America right now where young people are in crisis, right? The Surgeon General has talked about it. We're talking about it in the news a lot. We've gone from a period when I was a kid, Kristen, when you were a kid, when some of the people on this call were kids, right? Like from the 80s all the way through about 2012, not every kid was having a great time, but mental health was relatively stable for adolescents, right? And starting in 2012, we started to see spikes in anxiety and depression. And starting in 2018, it started going up a lot, right? The way kids felt about themselves, their confidence, it started declining significantly. And so we're in a moment right now where young people need a lot of help. And the thing about opportunities like the Kid Kindness Grants are that they're amazing ways to actually hit some of the most important buttons for giving young people that well of self-confidence and that well of self-image that they need to draw on when things get hard in middle and high school. So I want to talk about 3 things that these projects can do when they're done well really quick, and then I want to talk about how we as adults can support them. The first is that these projects can be an incredible catalyst for personal growth, right? The first thing that service projects can be is what the famous Stanford psychologist Albert Bandura called a mastery experience, right? A mastery experience is just an academic word for when you take on something that matters to you and you work really hard at it and you find yourself getting better at it and doing it well. And Bandura's research showed that that was the number one thing to give kids what he called self-efficacy, right? A feeling that they can do hard things, that if there's a challenge, they can take it on and beat it. Service projects are also a confirmation of contribution, right? And what is contribution, right? Contribution is feeling like you're adding something to a community, like you are able to help others and that others rely on you. And we know that when kids go from the sort of elementary stage to this sort of adolescent or pre-adolescent stage, one of the things that determines their wellness and their resilience is their feeling of contribution, is their feeling that they're a giver, not just a taker, right? And that the great thing about service projects like this is it can give kids a sense that, oh, gee, like I'm able to help people, even though I might still be in a space where I'm still a kid and I need to be helped. I'm able to make a contribution to the world. And that makes me feel like I have a lot of value. The final thing is that service projects can give a kid a sense of civic identity, right? When we think about things like voting or volunteering, we tend to think about those things as habits. You do it once and you do it again and again and again and again and again. The reason that those things tend to work like habits is that they're actually identities, right? The research shows when you vote, you see yourself as a voter. When you volunteer, you see yourself as a volunteer. And you keep on doing those things because you're engaging in identity confirming behavior, right? You want to do things that fit with your picture of who you are. So when kids do a service project, they build a positive identity around being an active citizen that not only makes them feel good, but then contributes to more of this behavior that makes them feel more empowered and more capable and more confident. So the hope, why so many people support organizations like Kindness Grows Here, the place where I used to work, is not just about the good that kids can do in the world, and they can do tremendous good, but the fact that these early experiences actually can change kids' lives. And as I've worked with, you know, high achieving and really impactful young people around the world who were, leading nonprofits in their early 20s, which is a lot of what we did at Peace First, a lot of them talked about early experiences with this kind of change making as really important moments in their growth. Second thing that these can do when they're done well are building relationships. We know relationships are one of the most important developmental assets for a young person. These projects can build relationships between young people and adults, between young people and their community. And I don't want to overlook the fact that these projects can be powerful catalysts for community change. And I'm not just talking about what young people wrote in their project description and the things that they're going to hand out. When we were at Peace First and giving out thousands of grants to young people doing service work around the world, we actually went and we did a study. We talked to young people months afterward or years afterward about what their projects achieved. And we found that about 2/3 of projects had some kind of effect that lasted beyond the initial project that we funded, right? Some of those were young people deciding, I want to keep doing my project, right? I might just keep doing what I've been doing before, or I might train other people to do it and it gets bigger. Some of those impacts came from awareness, right? Because I did this, other kids in my community started noticing, people became more aware of the problem and more people started taking action to solve it. Some of it was coalition building, right? Well, I did this and I met this person who works at this nonprofit and I started working with them, or I met these other kids and we decided to become friends and then we ended up working together on this other thing. Some of it was capacity building, right? We worked with a young person at Peace First who did a project with us and we didn't hear from them for a long time. And then years later, we found out they were elected the youngest member of the Scottish Parliament, right? And when we talked to them, what we realized from them was that early experience had given them the tools to talk to people in their community and be a leader and bring people together to make things happen. And the final thing is policy change. Sometimes kids find out a really good way of doing things, a really good way of solving problems, And maybe their school notices and it becomes a program that the school makes into an institution. Or maybe leaders in their community notice it and they actually change the way that services are provided in their community because kids found a better way to do it. That doesn't happen every time, but it happens enough times that this work is worth doing really well because the tail effects can be really profound. So that's enough about what this can be, because I think we're all here because we know that these projects can be really impactful. I want to talk about what grown-ups can do when they're working with kids to have this kind of impact. So the first thing I want to talk about is stepping up and stepping back, right? We talked a lot earlier, or I talked a lot earlier, about self-efficacy, right? How these projects can give kids a feeling of being really capable. And there are two concepts I want to talk about in here that really make that possible. The first is this idea of a Goldilocks zone, right? That a project like this, if it's scoped the right way, if the expectations are set up in the right way, can be a way to push kids just a little out of their comfort zone where they're learning a lot, but also doing something they know they can achieve. It's what the psychologist Lev Vygotsky called the zone of proximal development, right? Are they pushing themselves just a little bit? And the more they stay in that space, the stronger they feel they're getting. The other concept I want to talk about that can be hard for us as people who really care about kids is what I call the golden rule of adults supporting youth in service, right? Which is do not do things for kids that they can do for themselves. So when we think about stepping up and stepping back, part of how we step up is keeping kids in that Goldilocks zone and helping align their expectations and their thinking, the things that are both achievable and challenging. Part of how we step back is following that golden rule and putting more things in kids' hands that they're ready to do. The way I describe this is the sort of the supportive observer, the person who, if you're a teacher, kind of hanging out in the back of the classroom while kids are working on the project, being able to say, I'm here if you need me. With the planning process, one of the things you can do is lean in on facilitation, because sometimes kids need a little bit of help to think through the questions of how do I plan out a multi-step process. A place to lean out is deciding on what the goals are and what the steps are to get to those goals. Kids will struggle a bit at first, but if you let them struggle a little bit, they're really good at coming up with those things on their own, and they will own them so much better when they come from them. In terms of compiling resources, you can lean in on pointing out places in their community where kids might not understand, oh, we can bring in resources from here. But when it comes time to actually ask someone, hey, can we use this, or will you donate some of this? That's one great area that you can push kids to do on their own and not do for them. Can they write an email to this store asking them to donate? Can they make a call to the local church or mosque or synagogue asking if they can use their space for an event? In terms of execution, actually doing the work on the project, you can kind of lean in by asking some questions and maybe pointing out things that a kid may not have remembered, because it's hard to keep a lot of things in your head. But lean out on the actual doing, right? Make a list of tasks and as many as are feasible to assign out to the kids doing the project. Ideally, you should be, and certainly if you're doing things, you should be doing things that are sort of as basic as possible to stay in the mix and help, but assigning things to kids that feel like the meatiest work of the project. And always be explicit about the kind of support you are and aren't providing and why. Because some kids are used to grown-ups doing everything on a project. And so saying, hey, I'm giving this to you guys to figure out on your own because I know you can do it. And if you need help, you can ask me. We'll put it in their hands and we'll avoid the situation where they're kind of waiting for you to do something. And then not rescuing, right? Ultimately, there's nothing riding on these projects being perfect or working out great, right? And kids will learn a lot more if they, especially in the planning process, but even in the execution, stumble a little bit and it's not super polished, or something doesn't go the right way, or something breaks and it doesn't get replaced, because they'll have to figure out how to solve that problem themselves, or learn that the problem might not get solved, and that's okay. There was still something positive that happened. When we don't use our adult knowledge and capability to come in and rescue them, that's where that kind of learning is able to happen. So what I want to do, I want to pause because I've been on a roll. And I want to ask a question, which is like, as you guys are engaging in your kid kindness projects with the kids you work with, what is one place where you could lean out right now and give the young person you're working with more responsibility? And you can take yourself off mute or you can add a thought to the chat. But I'd be curious to hear one or two contributions about that.
So, well, I don't have a kid who is doing a kid kindness grant because I can't, because my kids aren't eligible. I do know that as far as like just thinking about like school projects or other kind of service projects that we've done, I have a tendency to really care about like the appearance and how it looks and everything coming together and looking great and wanting to kind of make it look really, really polished and help them out with that. And in my head, I kind of justify it like, I'm not doing any of the content and I'm not helping them with the research and I'm just helping them to make it look good. And so I love that you gave that specific example of like it doesn't have to be perfect. And so when I see a lot of these kind of our project completion reports come in, sometimes I wonder like, did the kid do this all on their own or was there an adult like really making it polished? Like I know I would if I was helping my child with a kid kindness grant. So if anyone else wants to share, we would love to hear your thoughts and perspectives.
I think I saw Valerie's mic off for a sec. Valerie, what's a place you can lean out?
I did. So Rosalind's really good with the art part of it,
Mhm.
but now that she's selling the art that the memory center participants paint, and she's going to these art fairs, helping her set up and trying to get her tent set up and her table set up, and everything is something that I tend to try to go in there and help with. But that is certainly something that I could lean out with and just let her try to do that, except for maybe the tent itself. It's kind of high and heavy. And she probably needs an adult help with that. But everything else, she can handle it. And I need to just sit back.
Some tents have to be a two-person thing. And often when I'm working with parents, like who are, and I work with a lot of parents now who generally are thinking about how to build their kids' confidence. And they're like, yeah, I do these things, but I have to help my kid with these things. I'm like, well, what would happen if you didn't? Like, let's just sit and think about like, what would happen if you didn't? They might struggle or be frustrated or fail for a minute, and they'd be okay. And again, they would know, like, and they would figure it out on their own, most of them eventually. And the benefit they get from that is super extreme. So, Hera, Cherie, anything you want to add, a place you can lean out? There's absolutely no pressure or obligation to share. Cool. I'm going to take that as a signal to keep it moving. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about, well, I've got a couple things to talk about. Expectation setting. And I want to talk about this in the context of what I call the perfectionism trap. You remember that graph where I was like, okay, kids' confidence is down about 40%. You could paste a complete inverse of that graph showing the increase of perfectionism over the past few years. Perfectionism in kids is rising. It's a big issue that's driving this anxiety crisis, right? This feeling of, I got to do things perfectly. And I got to tell you, kids who are natural sort of high achievers and who are other oriented, who want to please and help other people, who are exactly the kinds of kids who are drawn to doing service projects, deal with perfectionism at way higher rates than other people. So best case scenario, this kind of project does all of these great things. Worst case scenario, this kind of project becomes a vehicle for perfectionism in another venue, right? Now, here is how we can combat that. The first thing that you can do when you start working with kids is level set, right? Around proper expectations about the likelihood and the necessity of failure somewhere along the line. One of my first bosses, again at Peace First, where we worked with young people to plan projects around the world, would tell a Buddhist parable about a goblet. You talked about, the Buddha's disciples came to him, and he served them out of these magnificent goblets that were, fancy and very, very fragile. And they were like, well, hey, Buddha, why would you serve us out of these goblets? We could break them. You should keep them shut away. And Buddha says, well, the foolish man guards his treasures because he's worried that someone will break them. The wise man recognizes that, in some way, the goblet is already broken, and so drinks of it more freely. And he would tell that parable as a way to say to kids before they were about to take on something really hard, hey, the goblet's already broken. Something's going to go wrong. Nothing's going to go perfectly. Some kind of mistake is going to happen. Something is going to get messed up. I promise you it's not going to go perfectly. Go into it with the knowledge that not everything is going to go the way you expect, and do it freely and recognize that it doesn't have to be perfect. So, whether you use that story, which I've found really useful to break out at different times, or whether you come up with a different way to share it, level setting about the fact that perfect is not only not the expectation, it's not possible, is important. The other thing that you could do is take a little bit of time to pause and predict, brainstorming obstacles, right? It will be the case that some things happen that are unexpected that get in kids' way. And sometimes taking a little bit of time to think about those things before they happen can make kids feel more at ease and can reduce the likelihood that when something happens, they internalize, right? They put it inward on themselves and engage in self-blame. And the final thing that you can do is when those setbacks do inevitably happen, right? Promoting what we call in the self-compassion space, common humanity, right? The understanding that challenges, struggles, mistakes, when you're trying to do leadership work, happen to everyone. You could talk about the fact, I often talk about the fact to kids that Barack Obama lost the first time he ran for Congress when something doesn't work out that they were trying to do. Most people don't know that, right? They think of Barack Obama as this person who got everything he wanted all the time because he was amazing. Nope, that's not the way that worked. Or you can talk about moments from your own experience where you were building something or, trying to solve something and it didn't work out the way you hoped, right? Because ultimately, knowing that that is a part of the process helps kids cope with and temper their perfectionism and feel a sense of self-forgiveness rather than internalizing everything when things don't go quite right. So again, I want to pause and ask here, and no pressure to share. Hera, feel free to pop more in the chat. Feel free to come off mute. Is there an unrealistic expectation your kids might hold for the project, and what could you do about that? And Kristen, I know this is something that you probably see plenty of too in working with kids.
Yeah, I mean, I know just from like looking at the applications that we get, I think sometimes even just when kids apply, they apply with an expectation that they have to do something huge and grand and that's going to impact hundreds or thousands of people. And some of our favorite projects that we support are like really personal and just really well thought out. I think back to the very first year we did Kid Kindness Grants, and there was a little boy who did a project called Flower Friday, where one day when his mom had found out his teacher was pregnant, and so she had given him flowers to bring to her, and he saw how happy it made her. And so his mom had talked to him about this program, the Kid Kindness Grants, and he came home and he said, "Mom, I know what I want to do for my Kid Kindness Grant." He's like, "I want to give flowers to a different teacher every week." And that's what he did with the grant money, and it had such a huge impact. So I just want anybody who ever considers applying for a grant or gets a grant to carry it out to know that it's not about like being big and grand in how many people it impacts, but about just the importance of it impacting whoever it does impact in a really meaningful way.
Cherie, I saw your mic come off real quick. Was there something you wanted to share about expectations?
she basically summed it up. I was going to say the same thing because the kids that I was working with, they have these huge expectations. They always want to serve, like she said, hundreds and hundreds of people or
Mhm.
try to save the world, and they can't, So I usually just explain to them about, you only can do but so much and stuff like that. Still encourage them to still want to help as many as they can, but also let them know that it is a limit because that is not realistic at the same time.
Right. And everyone starts somewhere, right? Like I love
Yeah.
to tell a story to kids about how Michael Jordan got cut from the JV basketball team, right? Like there are, if their aspiration is to serve tons and tons and tons of people, that's great. Like we don't need to throw water on that. We just need to be honest about the fact that that might not happen at first. It might take a long time to get there, and it's okay if it starts small. It's actually good because a lot of the most successful nonprofits in history have started with just working with a few people, right? I mean, the company I work at that now helps thousands of kids around the country build confidence. We started out working with just 12 kids, and we did that for several months. And that ultimately is the thing, and that's harder for kids to understand because patience is just a tough thing at this age, right? It's easy to want to get everything fast and it's tough to wait. But that's an important thing to help with. Okay, a couple more quick things. Reflection. Reflection is how action turns into identity, right? Reflection is when we sit down and we think about all these things I'm doing. What am I learning from them? What am I proving about myself by doing them? And how am I changing as a result of this work? How could things be different in the future? And the thing about reflection is we often think like, oh, that's a thing that happens when the work is done. But actually, good reflection in an experience like that is continuous, right? So a reflection can be super simple. It does not have to be formal or structured, right? You can ask, what are you noticing? And use that conversation to reframe things for your young person, right? You can ask about the things that are hard and you can reframe that for them as, hey, this is you pushing yourself and showing grit, right? This is you doing the hard parts of this work, right? Like Val, Rosalind, when you're setting up that tent, like you are figuring out how to do a new thing that you haven't done before, and you're getting tougher when you do that. You can ask about what's easy or what's fun and highlight those things as like, these are your gifts. Like these are your strengths that you can build on. Because we know, right, the most compelling way to work with a young person sometimes is to build on their strengths and let that be the thing they anchor around. And you can ask them to notice things that could be going better and reframe that to them as, hey, it's normal for things to not be going perfectly, and actually being willing to notice, being willing to take a look at things that aren't being perfect is the work of leadership, right? Like that is the work that actually changes the world when you don't just make a first attempt at something, but you look at it and say, what could go better on a second attempt? That's when you're really able to change yourself and change the world. The other thing that you can do in reflection is you can point out what you see. And I say point out specifically because, a lot of like positive directional praise, I'm not saying praise is never a good thing, but a lot of like, you're such a good person, you're so smart, you're so capable. Like what that can do is it can kind of create like a reverse positive feedback loop where the young person starts to like feel dependent on the praise, or it feels like when they're not getting the praise, the project isn't as fun anymore. And we all know some of the best work in the world doesn't always have praise attached to it. But pointing out what you notice them doing, effort is important, but also creativity, preparation, thoughtfulness, inclusion of people, pointing out what you see them doing. And you don't have to label it as a good thing. You can just say, hey, I noticed that you did that. That's a way of prompting that reflection in them, because then they're going to play that track back for themselves. And I would consider doing a formal reflection at the end of the project. If it's a long thing, maybe at a midpoint. You might do it in terms of documenting or sharing out the project, like writing something for a school newspaper, or heck, write something for your local newspaper, right? Or Kindness Grows Here is going to start doing a really exciting project where we compile like reflections from the projects that kids have done to create kits that schools and communities can use for how to create cultures of kindness, right? So there's an opportunity to do that there. An ideal reflection is both external, like what kinds of changes am I seeing, and internal. How am I different? What is changing about me as a result of this work? Um, I want to talk really briefly about the kinds of stories you can kind of prompt or encourage your young person to tell about themselves that are really effective for their confidence and well-being. There's this brilliant researcher, Dan McAdams at Northwestern University in Chicago, who studies the power of personal narratives, the stories we tell ourselves, and how they make us feel. And he's done decades of research on this, and he's basically like, there are 4 types of good stories to tell about yourself. One type is a community story. Here is where I needed help, and people came around me to help me. And you can prompt that kind of thinking in your young person by asking them to think about all the folks who are supporting them on the project. The second is a coherent story, right? Where different parts of your life tie together or build on each other in a way that makes sense. And again, you can do that with your young person by asking them to make the connection between what did they see in the world that they thought they wanted to change, and then how did they make that change, right? Showing them that they're able to take things that matter to them and tie that into work they do in the future. The third kind of story that really helps build a positive self-image is a resilience story, right? When something bad happens and you either learned from it or recovered from it rather than just seeing it forever as a bad thing that happened to you. A resilience story is one of the most strong indicators of somebody with healthy mental wellness. Again, when they're able to frame tough things that happen, and tons of setbacks will happen across the project, as learning experiences or growth experiences. And the final thing is agency stories. Stories where you made a decision to do something and you did it because it mattered to you. The more of those stories we have, the stronger we are, the more mentally tough we are. And so when you set up a reflection, whether it's you're talking to your kid in the car when you're driving from here to there, or you're doing this with kids in the classroom and you make a little worksheet for them to fill out, you can set up the questions you ask to prompt this kind of thinking and prompt these kinds of stories so that your kids are building this story bank for themselves. So again, want to ask, either put it in the chat or share out loud, what's a way you might embed some reflection into your project formally or informally? Not all at once now. Oh, I love it, Valerie. So Valerie is sharing, just in case folks can't see the chat. Valerie's saying about, talking about a challenge that Rosalind experienced. And that's a really good catalyst for a resilience story, right? Where you can talk about like, hey, I noticed that this happened, this thing that was a setback, and you found a way through it. Tell me more about how you decided to do that, or tell me about why you thought that was the right solution, how you felt when that happened and how you feel now. Or, hey, what if you wrote about that so we could send that story to other kids who are doing kid kindness grant projects so they know how to deal with setbacks, right? And that experience for Rosalind might end up being a resilient story that she remembers and takes with her for a long time, the more reflection you put around it. So I love that, Valerie. Thanks. Anybody else want to share? Yeah, Krista.
I just want to add in real fast and tell very quickly a little bit about Rosalind's story, because I think that it hits on so many of these points. So Rosalind has gotten a Kid Kindness Grant 3 years in a row. And her first year, she painted a number of paintings. And Valerie, correct me if I'm forgetting any of the details, because I keep track of so many Kid Kindness Grants. But the first year, she got funds to paint a number of paintings, and she delivered them to memory care facilities. And this was during COVID, right? So she originally had kind of wanted to have more interaction, ended up just having to drop them off, et cetera. And so then the next year, she painted, Valerie mentioned she painted 96. I think then the year after that, it was like a couple hundred, maybe. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then this most recent year, she grew the project where, as Valerie mentioned in the chat, she was going into, oh my God, Valerie said the second year she increased it to 1,400 paintings that she was painting to give to residents in memory care facilities. And this year, she has been going into the memory care facilities program, memory care facilities, and having basically painting classes where she's bringing all the supplies and she's having the residents paint these small little canvases. But then what Rosalind is doing is she is setting up an art sale where she is selling the paintings and then using the funds from the art sale to purchase materials for kids in lower socioeconomic schools. So like, I mean, talk about a small idea growing into something bigger and the impact just growing and growing. And one of the things that I love that Valerie just shared was how, something that was a challenge for Rosalind turned into an opportunity to include more kids in spreading kindness. And I think we can't convey enough the important role that parents have in framing these stories in this way, because kids can very quickly and easily take a challenge or something that doesn't go wrong and spin it into a story of failure and instead of resilience, or of disaster instead of community. And so you as a parent have the ability to help them reframe those stories and then to retell those stories, remind them of when they were resilient, when they built community, when they showed how much agency they had. And that by retelling those stories, you are helping to build their confidence and to give them the desire to want to continue to do it. I know, like, for example, I do a lot of memory books with my kids. So like, if you want to like create a like photo book of their Kid Kindness Grant project and you help kind of tell the story with them in the book, and then they can read it over and over again, it's kind of one way to continue to really cement these stories for them.
So I'll talk for just a moment. We've got some refrigerator people here getting ready to do some work with our refrigerator, so it may get a little noisy. But one of the cool stories is her best friend knows Japanese, and we had a young one of the residents that was there. Several young girls were there, but one of the residents spoke Japanese. And so her friend was able to actually talk to this lady. And it was so impactful because each of the kids that she brings each time, they each have so many different strengths. And so one of the thing that was the most upsetting for her that first time was that so many of the residents were just sitting there with nobody to help them or encourage them. And she couldn't get around to everybody. As a teacher, I know this all the time. It's like, I want to be all the places all the time. And so she was frustrated with that. But now that she has friends, the workload and the sharing and the helping is divided among all of them. And it's just so cool to watch them just get out there and sit down and paint with them, and sometimes really bring out things that Rosalind wouldn't necessarily have the strength to do that with different people, and some of her friends do. So it's really neat to see.
That's awesome. She's helping to build these stories for her peers too, which is a really fantastic thing. Thank you so much, Valerie, for sharing.
Okay. Yes, thank you for that, Valerie. And I am almost done, but I want to talk about the last thing, which is like going deeper. If kids want to go deeper, right? Because sometimes I'm gonna swap between these two slides right now. Like, it's okay for this to be a one-time thing, for the Kid Kindness Grant to just be the Kid Kindness Grant, and that's okay. But right now, what kids are craving is, what psychologists refer to as locus of control, right? Like a feeling that I can change circumstances around me. I can be impactful. If I care about something, I have some influence. Agency, right? Being able to do things in a changing world that often feels not fair to them or out of their control is important. And actually, this kind of project can be a catalyst for something bigger, right? One easy way to start that process is to think about the root causes of the situation that they're dealing with, right? If they're working on something around, whether it's trying to provide better senior care or whether it's, a canned food drive, like, why is there loneliness in our community? Why is there poverty in our community? Where is that coming from? They can research other efforts that people are taking and think about what could be different. So, when I was working at Peace First, we sort of defined 5 things that a service project could do to really differentiate itself despite just, beyond just helping, right? Like what makes it really impactful? You could bring other people along, right? So, projects can be impactful not just because of the direct service they provide, but because they bring other people in to start a tradition of volunteerism for themselves. They can fill a gap, so they can identify people in a community who aren't being served by current models and provide service specifically to those people. They could address access needs, right? So they could, like, a perfect example of this is Meals on Wheels, right? For folks who can't visit food banks. They can identify people who technically have access to current systems of care, but maybe don't quite have the right, tools or ability or accessibility to use those things and solve that problem. They can try a different way of solving the problem, a way to inject, different kinds of support or more joy or more fun. Like I think of a project that we funded where there was a Girl Scout doing her Gold Award project where in her community, she noticed that there was an initiative to like create, birthday celebrations for homeless or low income kids. And she realized that like what they were actually doing was just like sending a box of cake mix and some party supplies to the families. And she was like, okay, like that's better than nothing. But these families probably don't have a lot of like spare time and energy to plan. If they're living in a homeless shelter, to bake a cake and plan a party. And so she was like, we're going to bake the cake. We're going to plan the party. We're going to put up the streamers. We're going to bring people there to celebrate. Like, we're going to take the work out of celebrating the birthday. So they're, doing that, looking at what other people were doing allowed her to figure out a better way to do it. And the final thing is, if you can do your project in a way that raises awareness, whether that's in your school or your broader community. So those are ways to go deeper. And then finally, speaking to local leaders, right? For a lot of kids, talking to an adult who's really working to solve a problem that they're also working to solve is a powerful validator. And I promise, maybe not President Biden, but a lot of, whether it's local elected officials or nonprofit leaders or a school superintendent, a lot of them will take 15 or 20 or 30 minutes to talk to a group of kids who are doing a project on something they care about, especially if the kid is the one who asks. And if they do want to take the project forward, they say, we see these things and we want to dig in. There are some great resources out there in addition to getting repeat kindness grants that can help kids with planning, but also with funding. Ashoka Young Changemaker Project, 3.Dash, Peace First, where I used to work. There are tons of resources out there like this. I'm happy to share more, but there are places that really want to give kids funding and mentorship to build these small things into something bigger, again, because they know they can be really impactful for the kid in the world. The second thing is to find a way to create a sustainable habit around leading the project, right? Like this is why Key Club works, right? As like one of the most effective ways, or like Boy Scout, Eagle Scout projects or Girl Scout Gold Award projects, because there's a structure of meetings so that kids are right, so that it's not on the kid to initiate progress, but there's a regular check-in point at which they're accountable or they're figuring it out. Like, so creating some kind of structured habit around engaging in it. And you don't have to figure out a whole logic model, but you do have to identify what I might call the insight, right? Like, hey, this is the problem we're trying to solve, and this is the root cause, and this is the solution we have and why we think it's different. And then what are we doing about it? What are you don't need to write out a full strategic plan, but what needs to get done, and figure out as many people as you can share it with. And if it's a one-time thing, then that's also good. Make sure you find a moment to celebrate it, because even small celebrations help produce feelings of accomplishment, and they can sort of lock in memories. They can be good moments for reflection. Sharing the impact, even in just a school paper, like I said before, that's a good way to encourage reflection, but you also never know what other kids you might inspire. There's a concept called vicarious experience, right? Where, I guess the best commonly used phrase to describe it is, if you see it, you can be it, right? Or you can't be what you can't see. When one kid in a community does a project and word gets out about it, that ends up being like, there ends up being like kind of a social contagion effect around it where other kids in the community start doing projects of their own. I mean, we've seen that in Crofton and in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, because of the work Kristen has done to start locally. Like all of these projects are proliferating out from the original Kid Kindness grants that went out. And again, as I was saying, document the things that you guys are doing and share them back with Kindness Grows Here, because again, we're going to be working over the next 2 years on creating guides for schools and communities based on things kids are actually doing for their projects on ways to increase kindness. So I want to open up and ask, what do you think you could do to go deeper? Or what do you think the next step might be for your kids? And that's going to be the last thing. And then I can take questions about building confidence and mental wellness in kids or helping with projects or really just about anything. But what do you think is the next step or a way to go deeper?
I'd also love to ask for the three of you that are still here, if you would share kind of where you're from and what some of the projects that your child did or kids that you've supported have done, because I just think it shows the impact of where these grants have come from. Go ahead, Erica.
I am at the horse barn right now. So I'm sorry I was late and I missed it, but I am with Penelope. So my daughter, gosh, it's been a couple years, right? I don't know, 2018 maybe. We applied for our first Kid Kindness grant for a project called Hunties Hope Hunters, and we recognized first responders and the crisis responders in our local county who help people who are struggling with addiction. And we basically just recognized them and gave them a moment of respite to say, what you do is hard, what you do matters, kind of thing. Penelope, spoke and shared and created a bookmark that kind of became our staple item. Tells the story about my nephew, Penelope's cousin, who passed in 2016 from an opioid overdose. And his name was Hunter. So she used to call him Hunty. So we named the project Hunties Hope Hunters. And so since 2018,
Can I add one detail there, Erica?
Yeah.
So they had a lunch for all of the first responders in all of Anne Arundel County, and they pulled in others. They brought others along. They got places to donate the food. They put together gift bags for them, and Penelope wrote a speech and gave it at the event. And what they found out at that event was it was the first time they had all been together, like in the same room. They'd all been doing these jobs, going out, crisis intervention, addressing, crises in the community, and but had never actually, many of them had never actually met face to face in person. They may have talked on the phone or touched base via notes in records, but hadn't had the opportunity to meet. And because of Penelope's project, that happened.
Yeah, actually, yes, that was one of the biggest like whoa moments, I think, was because we had worked with the Safe Stations program in Anne Arundel County, and Safe Stations is basically a program that allows a person with a substance use disorder to walk into a police station or a firehouse and at any time, day or night, and walk in and say, I need help. And so the fire or the EMT or, wherever they walk in, they do immediate triage, I guess, and then they pass them off to the crisis response team, who then helps facilitate treatment, or if they need medical care or whatever, they assess it. And yeah, those two entities, because the firefighters, I thought, it was really eye-opening for them, because a lot of times you see repeat, you have people who are struggling come in more than once, and they've never heard really what happens after. And so because of it, they were able to say, no, actually, it's very successful. And there are people who have, really done wonderful because they came into this firehouse and said, I need help. yeah, so it linked them, and Jen Corbin, who is the head of crisis response for Anne Arundel County, she immediately was like, okay, I just realized like we need to do this more often, because the responders, I mean, it's exhausting, and all they see is kind of the crisis, right? And then they don't actually hear that it works. So yeah, that
And
was
all that happened because a 6-year-old said, I want to help the people who helped Hunty.
Yep.
And so that was it. And then she grew it she had got a grant for a number of years in a row and grew it, and then and took it from there. You know, Erica, thinking about what Fish shared, and I know you came in kind of in the middle of it.
Yeah.
But you know, what is something, either a next step like you guys could take, or something that Kindness Grows Here could do to kind of, you know, to help, to whether it is to cement these stories or to really kind of help make it the meaningful experience that it is?
I mean, I think it being so child-centered is like amazing and what makes it so unique and awesome, because if you just ask a child what they want to do or who they want to help, like it's so organically can come about. And yes, obviously they need like the adult support and and but professionally I'm a school psychologist, so I always want to ask kids what their view is on something, and what is it that, like you mentioned, locus of control, like what is it that you feel like you want to try to do to improve something. And there's so many cool, great ideas that come out of just asking the kids.
I think that's a great next step for everybody, in relation to whether it's completing an application for a Kid Kindness Grant or just simply interacting with kids on a daily basis and asking them, what do you want to change? I love that. I think that's a really great perspective.
And
Sherry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, and then I was just going to say too, and I think like we shared this because 5 years, I think maybe we did it. And it grew and it grew and it grew and it got bigger and bigger. And then we had more people like wanting to like contribute to our Hope Hunters bags. And then Penelope took it a step further and said, well, we couldn't go into facilities during COVID, right? So Penelope then was like, well, we can still help people who are in like recovery, Mom, because we were really focused on the helpers. And she said, well, why don't we just bring bookmarks to the people in recovery? And I was like, okay. So then we started doing that, and then we started doing drives. And so it just kind of like organically happened. But I think like an obstacle, like, that we ran into was just that it got so big, really. And it was just, it just was very big. And we were challenged to get the project implemented in time. Like, I know it's important to definitely have, like, you have to have parameters. It's a grant application. But I would have to say that like it became more challenging for us to do it or to continue to apply, because I knew that like the time of year for us and the people we were helping, sometimes their partnership with us didn't coincide with like what we were able to do. And we always wanted to like maximize, the impact for the people and partner where we could to like relieve some of the project demands that we had. But I mean, other than that, like I encourage people all the time, because it's just like I think it's just so awesome to have this opportunity. And I just think it's so great that kids can have an idea and like do it. So, I support all the things.
Erica, I'm with you. It's not only is it great that kids can have an idea and do it, like those ideas can end up being really impactful. I've seen a lot of those ideas become like, they don't all, but I've seen those ideas become things that grow and scale. And they always have a tremendous impact on a kid, because then they can carry that experience with them forever of knowing,
Right.
I had this idea, I did it. And anytime I have an idea again, I know I can do it.
Yeah.
Like, that is a tremendous boost to see and self-esteem.
Yeah.
So that's all. I'm gonna stop presenting, because that's all I've got in terms of slides and things to share. I'm happy to take any questions, again, just about whether it's tactical questions about the projects, or bigger questions about the sort of youth mental health picture that we're dealing with right now, and some of the work I do with Legends, or really whatever folks want to talk about or hear about.
Cherie, do you mind reminding me where you're located?
Hi, sure. I'm in Anne Arundel County in Glen Burnie, Maryland.
Okay. Which school are you associated with?
Well, I
Or-
was associated with a nonprofit. It's Staying in Strong Mentoring Program.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And what project did you support a child in carrying out?
I forgot the name of it, but it was hygiene bags and food for the homeless. It was the living issues. I was once homeless, so they wanted to see how it feel. We would spend the night with them, like on the streets, actually live their life, eat what we're serving, and do the things that they do, just to give them the feel of it. So it's supposed to start it off with like between 25 to 100 hygiene bags. But as we stayed out there, did lives, pictures, stuff like that, of course it grew. So it became something regular. So we try to stay out there on Friday nights until Saturdays now because of the project.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. So
You're
yeah,
welcome.
so Erica's daughter Penelope is also here in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, and then Valerie's daughter has carried out her project in Washington State. Hera, who was on before, her son is in the Pittsburgh area. So I just loved that the folks here kind of showed how our Kid Kindness Grants program has grown all across the United States, which is really awesome. Does anybody have any questions for Fish? He's a great resource. He'd happily answer anything.
I also live in Anne Arundel County, like many of you, so I'll be around.
Well, I think what's next for Rosalind is she's trying to form her own nonprofit. And we just have started that process, and she is super excited. She also was invited to apply for MODS Awards, which is an award that's given by the Alzheimer's community to somebody that has had an impact on Alzheimer's and dementia patients. And so she's hopeful that may come about as well. But this has truly taken off more than I think she even imagined. And then hoping to grow it with more students in her school. So yeah, it's been exciting.
That's awesome, Valerie. That's so cool.
Well, if Rosalind has any questions or advice on the process of starting a nonprofit, I'm happy to meet with her or answer questions by email. Feel free to let her know that option is available.
I will let her know. She may be emailing you about that.
Absolutely.
Mom knows nothing.
I'd love it. Erica, you had a question?
Sorry. Yes. No. You know what? I was just thinking. I wonder. I guess. Because like to me, I'm like, oh, it's so easy. Like have an idea and like just do it, right? But I wonder if people are, kind of get like intimidated by the thought that it's like a grant, right? Like I don't know, like somebody who's never done it before, I wonder if that is at all ever an obstacle, because you're like, oh, like what we hear about grants, if you will, like they're these huge, grand, if you do have any knowledge, it's usually like a huge process. And I think you guys have made it so accessible. And I'm always surprised, like like, why didn't you apply for this? I told you, like, I will say that to somebody, like, I told you to go, but I don't know, like, I just had this moment of like wondering, as we're all sharing like our experiences, that to somebody who's never applied before, I wonder if they are just like, ooh, a grant, like I'll never get that. Like when we applied, it was like what, the day before I submitted it, because I was like, I have no time to do this. I'm just gonna whatever, I'll just do it. And we submitted it the day before, but I just wonder if that can sometimes, if that's ever the possible like deterrent or obstacle to somebody. They're like, oh, it's too much to do, or they think it's a bigger thing than it is. So I don't know.
It
It's just a thought.
100%, it 100% is, Erica. I mean, when I was at Peace First, we were often giving young people their first grants that they'd ever received. And a lot of people who came to us said, like, this isn't something I could have ever imagined myself doing. And I thought that it wasn't, I thought it wasn't possible for me. I think that it's on all of us in the stories we tell. Number one, it's on like organizations to make their processes easy, which KGH does a great job of doing, right? Super simple, super streamlined. Anybody can apply, period. But part of it too, what?
Oh, I was just going to add really fast. We actually got this exact feedback, and like there was somebody who assumed, like, because of the word grant, like that it meant it was government funded. And I guess there's a thing with like Girl Scouts where you can't get money from the government or something. So we tried to clarify that in our description. And we also put in letters, I don't know if you can see it on my phone, but we put in big letters. Oh, no, it blacks it out. It says, please note, applicants, it says at the very top, applicants do not need any experience in grant writing to apply. So we did put that on the top of the page just this year because we received similar feedback. I would love, I mean, I don't know that we're necessarily going to change the name, but maybe like a subheader or explanation that would kind of help soften it a little bit. I would love any suggestions or ideas on that, because I think, your point is definitely well made and definitely resonates with a lot of folks.
I also think one of the things that we can all do beyond just the people giving the grants is in how we tell our own stories, right? Like in this case, how we tell the stories of our kids and our kids' projects. There's so much, and I would say this when I was talking with kids about like how to tell their stories, right? I'm like, there is so much temptation to emphasize the perfect in your story, right? To talk about all the things you did well and to be like, here's how easy it was for me. And actually, the best thing you can do for the people coming along and also for yourself is to be honest about all the things that were hard, the ways you didn't feel prepared when you first applied for the grant, how it felt when you first got it, the way it was challenging, the things that you did. Because what kids need to hear is not the story of the like, and you see these in the news or on Upworthy every so often, right? Of the like perfectly polished kid with the momager who like, is like speaking on the TED stage. And like, I have worked with so many of those kids, and those kids are delightful. And they're doing really good work in the world, but like, that's not the kind of story that makes a kid feel like this is for them. The kind of story that kids need to hear is one that's full of a lot of bumps and bruises and scrapes, and a kid who kind of built something with duct tape that wasn't perfect, but that made a difference anyway. And the more we like sand down the rough edges of our kids' stories, number one, the more we rob them of the ability to tell a resilience story for themselves, right? Like the more their story is like, I did this amazing job at this and this was perfect, like there's not a lot of growth mentally that they get from that. And the more we perpetuate the idea for other kids, like how this is a thing that like those like super high achieving Einstein kids can do, but I can't. And so like, it makes me really happy to come here and hear like Valerie, you sharing about like some of the things that Rosalind really struggled with, for instance, when she was first working with centers, right? Just, the more we can share about the tough parts, that's what's going to make kids be like, oh, this is for me.
So they think I can do this too.
Yeah. And another thing is Rosalind doesn't have grandparents. Papa was her last grandparent, and that's who she does this in memory of. So sometimes when she gets to the memory care centers, and as she's growing older, she's starting to forget little parts about him. She's feeling sometimes inadequate to even talk to these people that are so much older than her. And she's like, I don't have experience with grandparents anymore. And so it's a growth thing for her too, to be able to interact with them on a more natural level, because she doesn't have that experience.
what a skill set she's gaining, though, to go out of her comfort zone a little bit and to learn how to talk to people and the importance of those connections. I hope she's realizing what a difference she's making. Well, I cannot thank those of you who joined us tonight enough. And Fish, thank you so much. This was such a great presentation. You shared so much great knowledge and information and perspective, and I can't wait to share it out after this because I think a lot of people will really benefit from it. So thank you.
My pleasure. It's always, Kristen, you know, it's always an honor to support the work that you do with KGH. And I think everyone knows, or they should, Kristen does all this work as a volunteer. And Kristen not only does all this work as a volunteer, but corrals an incredible team of volunteers to do this, because really we believe in her, and the way that she embodies kindness and is able to bring a lot of people along. And then create this movement of what is literally hundreds of kids working around now the world to do the KKG projects. So it is like Kindness Grows Here, I think, is the perfect example of, like, you know, the whole one voice can change a room and then it can change a world. The amazing community catalyst that one person deciding to take action can be. And it's you know, it's a great story for the kids to see in front of them as they're doing this work.
Oh, thank you so much, Fish. Well, we have an amazing team at Kindness Grows Here of people who have come together to share this mission and work. And I am so grateful. I think some of you may have seen in the comments that Hera's son got a Kid Kindness grant, and then we ended up reaching out to her and saying, hey, would you like to be a kindness ambassador for us? And so she's not a board member, but she is a huge volunteer for us. If anybody has any interest in doing that, we would love to welcome kindness ambassadors from any part of the U.S. So we do have a application I can share. It's actually going to be on the main page of our website shortly. And, you know, feel free to reach out. But thank you so much. And I'm going to stop recording now. And